Our presenter today is Will Yang from Learnerator. Will is a student at Northwestern who recently put together an online course on how to master the Common Application. So he is certainly an expert in that area, and today he will be sharing with us how to get through the Common Application, some different tips and tricks, as well as some ways to get good recommendation letters from your teachers and counselor. During Will's presentation, if you have any questions for Will, please go ahead and chat them in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll take questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, Will, take it away.
Thanks, Rob. Hey guys, my name is Will Yang. I'm a junior at Northwestern University. In this past summer, I launched an online course that has now enrolled close to about 1,000 students. And what it pretty much does is it breaks down the common application step by step to walk you through what to expect, how to fill it out, and how to submit it on time. So today we're going to do a kind of condensed version of that course in the next hour. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to cover the common application. What is it? What is it going to ask you to do? And what are some tips and tricks to keep in mind as you fill it out? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about teacher recommendations, and then finally we'll talk about guidance recommendations. If you have any questions for me following the conclusion of the common application, we'll take a short break between the common application and teacher recommendations so that we can get those questions out of the way. And then at the very end of the presentation, we'll go ahead and open it up to a general Q&A. So getting started, the common application is a universal application that's accepted by many colleges in the United States in today's day and age. So essentially, it was a way to really streamline the college application process. Back before the Common Application was established in 1975, a lot of students would have to manually submit via, snail mail the application for X school and then also the application for Y school, Z school, and so on. And each school had their own different application to fill out. So this was incredibly confusing for students because they would have to fill out, anywhere from 3 to 12 applications, which was difficult to keep track of. So the goal of the Common Application is to really consolidate all of that into one single application that multiple schools can accept and multiple schools can expect in terms of having the same standard of quality. So it's a not-for-profit organization. It's totally free to use the Common Application, and I highly encourage you to do so because many schools have adopted it, and it's a standardized first-year application for undergraduates. So the goal of the Common Application is to provide reliable services that promote equity, access, and integrity in the college application process. So like I said before, the Common Application was really created to streamline the entire process. Nowadays, it's easier than ever to apply to multiple universities, and the reason why is largely due to the Common Application. In fact, nowadays, students are applying to an average of 4.1 schools per per application. So every single Common Application user on the website actually submits roughly 4 applications, which is an increase from years past. Many students nowadays are applying to anywhere from 4 to 7 schools because it's so easy to do, and it's always nice to kind of spread out your chances as you apply to multiple colleges, hoping to gain an acceptance. So now I'm going to go into the fundamentals. I'm going to give you a brief overview in terms of what to expect when you create your account on the Common App site. So to break it down, the Common Application consists of 9 sections. And this year is actually a new year for the Common Application because what they've done is they've actually revamped their website. So some of these sections are not as necessarily as clear as they once were in terms of the specific breakdown, but all of the core information remains the same. So to walk you through it, you first open up with the applicant information, then you talk more about your future plans, the demographics of your background, of family, education, your academic records, the activities that you're involved with, a writing sample, and then finally you sign off on your Common Application. So these are the 9 fundamental parts of the Common Application that are necessary in every single one of the applications that go through the Common App site. So to break it down further, let's go into each respective section. The first thing that the Common Application really asks you is, who are you? And what I mean by that is it's asking you for general information. In this part of the Common Application, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be asking you for basic information like your name, your birth date, your social security number, your contact information, your mailing address. So there's really not much to this section of the Common Application, but what it does for colleges is it provides information on how to communicate with you, and what you'll also find is that for scholarships and pamphlets and everything that schools send to your mailing address, they will have to have this information in order to address it to the correct location. Moving on, you get into the basic four-year plan. So this is asking the question of what your college experience is going to be like. So in this section of the Common Application, what it's specifically asking you is what time of the year that you're planning on entering. Some students decide to enroll immediately in the fall once they graduate from high school, and some students choose to delay their enrollment for a quarter or a semester until the spring. And it also asks you about some of your interests academically and career-wise, whether or not you'll be applying to financial aid or scholarships, and also if you're going to be living on campus full-time or not. Something to keep in mind when you're in this respective section of the Common Application is to go ahead and click yes for financial aid and scholarships, regardless of your financial background, just because it doesn't hurt you necessarily in asking for financial aid or scholarships, especially when it comes to merit-based scholarships. If you're a high-achieving student, then you will have the potential opportunity of being what many schools call presidential scholars. And what they do is they essentially offer a totally merit-based scholarship just based on your high school academic performance. So the future plan section is providing colleges with information about your broad interests as along with what you are specifically applying for. In the next section, we go into what your demographics are, what's your background. So in this section, the Common Application is going to be asking you about whether or not you're a U.S. citizen, where you were born, the years that you spent in and out of the United States, what languages you're proficient with, along with an optional ethnic identification section. So in this section, again, it's very much like the very first section of the Common Application with basic information, where it's just asking you critical information about your citizenship and your ethnicity. And the reason why this is important in terms of the citizenship field is because if you're not a U.S. citizen, then your application will be pulled off into the international applicant pool, as opposed to if you are a U.S. citizen, then you'll be with all the other U.S. Applicants as well. So that's the main difference there in terms of classifying of the classification of applications. Moving on, it'll talk about more background about your family. So here it'll ask you about your household. It'll ask you about the background of your parents. So whether or not your parents went to college or not. This is an important consideration if you are a first generation to go to college, because many colleges often give you a preferential kind of, I guess, positioning in terms of the applicant pool if you are a first generation to go to college in your family, just because, with education and higher education these days, everybody's pushing for open and equal access to education. So some schools are specifically looking for students to fill that kind of field in that void in their student body population. This section will also ask you about your legal guardian. So in the case that you don't live with your parents, this is the place to, provide information about your legal guardian. And then it also asks you about your siblings. And when it asks you about your siblings, it'll ask you about how old they are, what school they attended, if they've already attended college. And this can play a minor role in terms of if you're applying to a school that your siblings have attended, because it usually can, start potentially a legacy, a family legacy, in the sense that your sister might go to Emory and you might be applying to Emory. So Emory might give you a little bit more of a kind of uh, preferential ranking in terms of the applicant pool, but only by a slight margin in the case where you are in between a tie between applicant A and applicant B, with A being you and B being another student. So the family section is really providing colleges with your parents' contact information along with the education history of your family. This is mainly really important for, as I said, first generation to go to college students. So in the next section, it'll ask you about where you go to high school. In this section, you're going to fill out basic information about your high school that you attend. You'll also look up the specific code that your high school has been allocated. And this code is something that you'll get to know really well because it's the same code that you're going to be using when you send off your SAT and ACT scores. In this section, you'll also be designating who your guidance counselor is, along with any college or university affiliated courses that you've taken. So let's say you spend a summer or you spend your nights taking classes at a local community college or a local university. This is the place to really put those down. Some students take talent identification programs. I know Duke University offers those, and that would be a place to potentially, look into what courses, if any, do apply and can be translated over. In terms of the overall section here, it's just providing colleges with secondary school information and your guidance counselor's contact information. So the next thing that you'll be asked is what your academic background is. This is the place where you'll give colleges a very general picture of your high school academic performance. So this is the place where you will denote your grade point average along with your standardized test scores. Oftentimes when students approach me as to whether or not to present their grade point average as weighted or unweighted, I typically say a 3.4 or above should be listed as unweighted, and a 3.4 or below a 3.4 should be listed as a weighted average. And the reason why is because, typically speaking, for students above a 3.4, they're in a high percentile in their respective high school class. So a 3.4 and above is often a good representation of the student in terms of their relative standing in their high school class. In terms of weighting it if it's below a 3.4, the reason why I do that is because in some cases students have taken more challenging courses, which will then be able to raise that GPA that's below a 3.4 up a little bit with that increased weight from taking the more difficult class. In terms of standardized test scores, ACT versus SAT, the two really are pretty comparable nowadays. Back in the day, the SAT was slightly favored in terms of the admissions process. However, nowadays it's really more or less the same thing. What I would say in terms of sending off your scores is to not forget that the SAT and College Board super scores. And what I mean by that is these organizations, these testing organizations will take only your best scores and send it off to the colleges. So when you get to choose which scores essentially are sent off to the colleges. So if you took the SAT once and got a 710 in writing, but then the next time you got an 800 in writing, you can choose to have the 800 sent, and along with those other scores that might have been better than that first time. So you can be very selective in terms of which scores you choose. This is also the place where you'll list any AP, IB, or subject or SAT subject test that you've taken. So this is a good place to really display the academic load, the course load that you've taken. That's probably the most important takeaway to take from this academic background section, is to really emphasize the course load. Ideally, what you want to be doing is consistently be taking harder classes every single year so that by your senior year you can kind of reach the culmination of your high school experience with the most challenging courses available at your high school, or the most challenging courses of your entire high school career. The next thing that you're going to be asked to provide information about is what you're involved in. So this is a really critical component of the Common Application. This is the part where you're talking about your extracurriculars and your work experience. This is a really basic section in terms of the actual Common Application itself, but it lends to a lot of potential in terms of the additional information section. And what I mean by that is when you're actually in the activity section of the Common Application, it'll ask you pretty basic information, like the years that you've been involved with this extracurricular, the average hours of involvement, the positions or honors that you've been able to earn in this capacity, along with a short activity description. And what you'll notice within this activity section is that it's maxed out at 10 activities. And the reason why is because schools nowadays don't necessarily want to see you over involved in a bunch of activities. They want you to be selective in which activities you truly value so that you can help display to the school what you're really passionate about. And in this case, what you want to do in the activity section is make sure that you list all of your activities in the order of importance. So that means that if you're spending 10 hours every single week at crew practice, crew should probably be your first activity over all of your other activities like Beta Club or National Honor Society. So the extracurricular section aims to provide information about what clubs, organizations, or sports teams that you might have been involved with throughout high school. However, what I will say about this section, and what I won't be able to cover tonight, is that there's a lot of potential to provide deep insights to for colleges in terms of your activities with an additional supplementary resume in the additional information section. So I actually cover this in my course, but really quickly, what you really want to do in terms of conveying in the supplementary information section is you want to attach a resume that's results-based and results-driven. And what I mean by that is you really want to convey to anybody that comes across this resume or activity sheet that you not only were a part of these organizations, but that you also left behind a profound impact and made a difference in that if you hadn't participated in this organization, it just would not be the same today. So that's something to keep in mind as you fill out this section of the Common Application. It's a really important section to keep in mind and a really important section to focus a lot of your attention towards in comparison to the earlier sections that we talked about. In relation to the entire Common Application, the activity section is easily the second primary focus in terms of the Common Application behind only the essay. So now I'm going to go into the essay in terms of some tips to keep in mind, along with just some general guidelines to think about as you approach the college essay writing process. This is a process that is incredibly difficult for a lot of students to master, and oftentimes your first few application essays are going to be mediocre simply because you're not used to writing in the style that college application essays are looking for. So some things to keep in mind. The first thing is that you really want to avoid wordiness. A lot of students have a tendency to ramble on in their college application essays, and so when the Common Application asks you to answer the prompt in 650 words, students are going on to about 800 words and then reducing their margins to a half inch around just to fit everything onto the page. This is not what you want to do, and you want to make sure that you can always cut down to meet the character or word limit threshold that the school or the Common Application presents you with. So in terms of avoiding wordiness, one of the quickest ways to really cut down on wordiness is to get rid of these filler words that you put in there. For example, the word that can often be just deleted straight out without impacting the meaning of the sentence whatsoever. And also, you can also look into which sentences you're going into way too much detail about and really cut it down. Something to keep in mind is that simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication, and oftentimes students feel that they have to convey to colleges that they know complex sentence structures and how to form complex sentence structures, that they end up creating run-on sentences that are incredibly wordy. So remember, sometimes it's better to just write a short and sweet sentence than it is to write a elaborate, detailed sentence. So that leads me to the second point, which is to go ahead and be specific and concise. The kind of leading question that I always give students as they walk through their essays and go through their drafting process is to ask the question after every single sentence, does this sentence help me convey my message? So does this sentence actually drive my essay forward in terms of what I ultimately want to convey to an admissions officer? And if the answer is ever no or maybe, then you need to work on that essay or delete it entirely. Because the thing that you'll quickly realize as you start the essay drafting process, if you haven't started already, is that it's incredibly hard to fit everything into the word limit that's given, just because you want to tell the person everything about this specific experience that you're writing about. However, you have to be selective in terms of the information that you decide to convey. So that leads me to the next point, which is to focus on one aspect of yourself. A common problem that students face when they start answering the prompts of the common application essays is that they really just try to talk about every single potential thing that they think a person that doesn't know them needs to know about them. And what I really want to emphasize is that you don't necessarily need to talk about, the 3 or 5 different things that you're involved with in high school. If you're trying to come across as a very involved person, you can do so by just focusing on one thing and really getting into detail about how you have, focused your attention towards that one activity. It's oftentimes much better to talk about specific experiences that in some cases are only a matter of minutes in reality. So what I mean by that is, you could have an experience camping or something like that where it literally happened for maybe 10 minutes or so, but that 10-minute window of time actually profoundly impacted the way that you view something today in terms of your worldview. I mean, you'd be really surprised to read about, which essays are really powerful and which ones aren't. And oftentimes what I see students struggle with is that they write essays about long experiences, for example, what they did one summer, as opposed to writing about a specific instance within that summer. So like a specific Friday night that significantly influenced them in terms of, what they took away from the experience. So keep that in mind as you start thinking about your essay topic, is that you really want to focus on one specific example or one specific experience. Stop trying to talk about everything that you've done, because it's really difficult to be able to fit that into 650 words or 500 words, depending on the respective essay that you're answering. And it's also just a constant struggle that students have with the essay writing process. So the next thing is to avoid squirrels. And what I mean by that is to avoid the tangents that you tend to deviate towards. And oftentimes this goes back to the last point where students try to overstretch themselves. They start writing about their national forensics competition, and then at some point in the essay they start talking about basketball. It has no relation to the original topic. However, they just thought that it might convey to the admissions officer that they're also athletic or something like that. I'm creating these very like almost ridiculous examples just to show you just how much that sometimes students deviate from the original focus of their essay. So again, remember, be specific and concise. Ask that question in terms of if this sentence drives my essay forward, because if it doesn't, then you can probably either delete it or you need to revise it. And the last thing is to also be proud but not cocky. And what I mean by that is it's great to talk about how you were a regional qualifier for a tennis meet, or that you were awarded X, Y, and Z, but try not to come across as that kid that knows he's awesome and comes across as a very pompous person. So it's really important to walk the line and understand that it's important to convey your accomplishments, but you don't necessarily have to do it with an excessive amount of pride. And the easiest way to really screen this is by asking people to proofread your essay and ask them if you come across like you're a little bit too cocky. So some more tips to go through. Break down your draft, and what I mean by that is go paragraph by paragraph and really vet through your essay drafts. Oftentimes it's better to break down your writing sessions into 25-minute chunks and to go ahead and focus on one paragraph for that entire 25 minutes and make sure that you're mastering that one paragraph, so that collectively when you bring it all together, every single sentence really does help convey your message in terms of what you're trying to show the admissions officer. And so that leads me to creating a feedback loop. It's really important to surround yourself with people that can help you through the process. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to grab 2 to 3 friends along with family, along with teachers, and to go ahead and make them your network of editors. What you want to do is every single draft or so, you want to send it to a different person. So maybe the first draft, you give it to your friend to look over, your friend returns it to you, and then you end up giving it to your parents, and then you take that back, revise it again, and you send it to your teacher. The idea is that you want to get as many different eyes as possible on your essay, just because it's the easiest way to really get an overall feel for how your essay is going to be perceived. remember, you're targeting a specific reader that can really relate to your essay, but on a more universal level. So the thing about admissions officers is that a lot of admissions offices have younger readers as well, along with, older readers. So you have to make sure that your essay is able to really hit the right note on all these different age groups. And the easiest way to do that is to approach your friends, your teachers, your guidance counselors, along with your parents. So make sure that you're getting a lot of people to read over your essay. Don't be afraid of your friends copying your essays or anything like that. I always think that's kind of silly just because, even if they did take your idea, they wouldn't be able to say it in a nearly as impactful way as you'll be able to deliver it just because it's your story. So try not to really be too paranoid about that just because you really do want to get as many eyes as possible on your essay. And it's just a really important thing to set up that feedback loop. The next thing in terms of editing is to read your essay backwards. So as you're proofreading your essay, read the last sentence and then start from the very end to the very beginning to see if you make any fundamental grammatical mistakes. It's the easiest way to really catch these errors just because it's just totally different than reading it in order and having the sentences semantically make sense. You're pretty much reading this essay backwards just for the pure aspect of getting every single grammatical mistake out of there as soon as possible. So the next one is cut out your filler words that relates to something I already said with, words like that and cutting down on some of the areas where you might be getting into a little too much detail. And my last tip for you is to go ahead and start early. It's now November. If you haven't already started on your college applications, you definitely should get a go on it because you've got a little under 2 months to go. And the essay writing process is often a long one. It often requires students at least a month to really get a draft that they're satisfied with, just because you're juggling senior year as well as getting your teacher recommendations intact and everything else ready to go by the January deadline. So one big tip to keep in mind as you move forward in your writing process, if your English teachers haven't taught you already, is to make your sentences active. You want to really avoid using passive voice. So I'm going to give you two examples here. The first one is the door was left open. And the second one is Will left the door open. So the difference between the first sentence, the passive sentence, and the active sentence is that it really shows that which subject is actually performing the action. So it engages your reader in a much faster motion than the passive sentence, which was the door was left open. That's a very, that's something that you would kind of listen to in terms of a movie when they're panning over a scene, as opposed to a movie that really puts you into the middle of the action. And the second example would be the students are taught by Will, and an active sentence of that would be Will teaches the students. Oftentimes, using the active sentence is also an easy way to really cut down your word count just because you'll find yourself not having to use a bunch of filler words to get across your point. So now I'm going to take a short intermission, take 5 questions or so, before I move on to the teacher evaluation section of the Common Application.
Um, the first one, which you kind of addressed, but they're asking when should we fill out the Common App? So I believe this is for a student who is not currently a senior. So for those that aren't seniors, what's kind of the long-term strategy that you advise?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the greatest ways to really get ahead of the pack is in the summer before your senior year, you can actually access the previous year's Common Application. So you can often access this either via a PDF file if you go onto the Common Application website, or you can just set up your Common Application account. Oftentimes they don't release the official Common Application until I believe it's August. However, what you can do is you can look at previous years in terms of what the information was, and oftentimes they don't change the information a lot between years. So then what you can do is you can just go ahead and fill out that information on paper or on your computer and just make sure that you have all the information in check. So if you think about it, you can be saving yourself a lot of time because by the time the Common Application actually rolls out in August or so, what you'll have is you'll have all the information you need, and it's just a matter of plugging and chugging through the application itself. So a great way is to really just get all the information that you need now, so as soon as possible, so that you can just plug and chug when the actual application comes out and focus your efforts towards your essay and your activity sheet.
And with the essay, should that follow a similar timeline? I know that they changed the prompts this year for the Common App, so how should students plan ahead for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for this specific year, they've changed the common application prompts to be more universally based. In the past, um, the essays didn't necessarily all relate specifically to the student, but now I think the common application has done a really great job of coming up with essay prompts that really help students convey a specific aspect of themselves. And so what I always recommend with students that are looking to get a head start is to start their essays either in the spring quarter of their high school junior year or to start in the summer. You know, spring is being pretty ambitious, but what I will say is the students that I find with the really proactive nature in them to get started and take initiative often start in the very beginning of their senior summer, and they often have some of the strongest essays just because, like I said, the essay writing process is a very long one, and by devoting 2 to 3 months of summer to really focus in on that, students are able to really work through all of the kinks that they have here and there as they approach the writing process, which is a lot different from just a standard school assignment writing process.
Thanks, Will. We had some confusion about the weighted versus unweighted GPA. A student asked if I know my school weights my GPA and I'm above a 3.4, should I still say that it's an unweighted GPA, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so if your school, weights your GPA on your transcript, they'll also list your unweighted GPA. What I would do is I would just look at your unofficial transcript, see what the number is, and decide for yourself as to whether or not you think it would be beneficial for you to list it as weighted or unweighted. The thing about this section is it's not that big of a deal just because your guidance counselor will be filling out an evaluation to kind of show the admissions officer where you stand in relation to the rest of your academic of the rest of your high school class. So your ultimate decision to list your GPA is totally up to you. It really isn't that big of a deal. It's just that in the past, students have approached me asking me, should I check the unweighted box or the weighted box, and I pretty much just came up with a general guideline of 3.4 to kind of have students give students a guideline to follow.
Got it. And then one last question, and then there were a couple that probably pertain, would be better to hold off until the end. But we do have a question from a counselor about submitting SAT scores. They say that usually we tell our students that all SAT scores are sent from the test administrators, and that you can't pick and choose. Has this been your experience that colleges look at these scores and choose the highest? And I can just very quickly say from my experience, I know there's a list. I can send it out to everyone of which colleges super score, which don't. There's different ways they can super score an entire sitting or just one section. Um, but obviously, generally speaking, the colleges will have access to all those scores. Having said that, it is valuable to take the SAT multiple times. You don't want to go crazy and take it, 7 or 8 times, because then you'll look a little suspect to the schools. But you should, try and get out your top score every time you take it, and taking it 2, 3, even 4 times can sometimes be wise because of the super scoring policy. Will, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I was actually referring to super scoring. In terms of, schools that do super score, a lot of schools are adopting the policy now where they accept your highest score. So what you want to do is you want to go to each respective school, see if they do super score, and if they do, when you're sending the school report through the college board, you can selectively choose which scores to send the colleges, just because they do accept super scores, you'll be able to choose which ones. In schools that don't accept super scores, you'll have to go ahead and send that entire report. So it really depends also by high school. Some high schools on the unofficial transcript or the actual transcript itself, they will list the students' scores of all the times they've taken the standardized tests. Other schools don't do that. So if your school lists all of your scores, then it doesn't really help you to necessarily withhold any scores from a school that super scores. But if your high school doesn't list all of your SAT or other standardized test scores on your transcript, then it could be to your advantage to choose the scores that you perform the best at in a situation where you're applying for a school that super scores.
Great, thanks, Will. So that's it for
Great.
questions right now. If folks have more questions, please shoot them our way and we will answer them, or I'll pass them along to Will at the end of his presentation.
Great. So now I'm going to move on to the teacher evaluation, which is also commonly referred to as the teacher recommendation. A question that students often ask me is who they should choose to write their college recommendation letter. So these are some leading questions that I usually ask students in terms of coming up with that answer. The first one is, what is your favorite subject? Because oftentimes the subject that you're passionate about, something that you're really involved with at school, is something that you tend to devote more of your attention or efforts towards. So if you're really strong in math, keep you probably stay attentive in class a little bit more in math class than you do in, say, history class. The next thing to really ask yourself is what your strongest or weaker subject is, because in some cases, you know, it can actually help you to find a teacher that might be a weaker subject area, but something that might just happen to be your favorite subject. So you could have a situation where English is your favorite subject, but it's also your weakest subject. And that can be a pretty interesting recommendation letter if you know your English teacher really well, because he or she could really convey to the admissions officer that, look, Jim isn't really that great at English, but he really devotes himself to every single assignment and pushes towards presenting himself as capably as he possibly can in every single assignment or presentation, right? So like those are two of the main questions that you want to ask yourself. But the next questions that you want to ask yourselves is which teacher you're actually closest with. So when you go through your list of teachers, you want to ask yourself, if I was just hanging out at school after the school day ended, which teacher would I typically drop by just to talk with, just to get to know a little bit better in terms of what their interests are and whatnot. So that leads us to the next question, which is what is the nature of the relationship? If you are really close with a teacher and you know you constantly turn to this teacher for guidance in terms of your course load, your academics, or even your athletics, or anything like that, that can be a kind of telltale sign for you to choose that teacher, just because that teacher has gotten to know you on a more personal level. And finally, you want to ask yourself how well the teacher writes. So in some cases, some teachers aren't necessarily the best writers, and something that you really want to keep in mind as an applicant is that these teacher recommendations are the third person kind of perspective for admissions officers to see how others perceive you. And if you're really close with your math teacher and he just happens to not be able to write really well and be able to convey to an admissions officer that you are a great student, you are really unique, then it might be advantageous to choose another teacher that is a really strong writer that you might not necessarily be the closest with. So the teachers that you select to write your letters of recommendation play a vital role in your college application success. A common example that I present with students these days is that it really doesn't matter that much what the subject area is in terms of who you find to get your recommendation letter. And the testament to that is that last academic school year, we worked with around 62 students on a one-on-one basis, helping them through the college application process. And what we found was that students that were getting their English teachers and their Spanish teachers, so two humanities-based courses to write their letters of recommendations, were still getting into top 25 schools, whereas some students that were kind of begrudgingly getting a teacher that they weren't that close with, but just because they heard from a guidance counselor or they heard from a book or something like that that they needed to have a humanities-based course along with a hard science slash math teacher, what they did was they ended up getting a math teacher to write their recommendation letter, but they weren't that close to that math teacher, and they ended up getting either waitlisted or getting denied from the school. So my policy here is really get whoever you're closest with. You'll tend to know which teachers you're closest with, or at least which teachers you like the most. So really keep that in mind, and don't let this dogma that you have to have a humanities teacher along with a science teacher, or you know that kind of mentality kind of trap you in terms of which teachers you seek for your application, because again, the teachers that you select here are the third eye point of view in terms of who you are as a person, as the people around you kind of perceive you. So main tip here is to don't break the bridge. It's really important to get, teachers that you're really close with. Oftentimes students will get their junior teachers to write the recommendations just because that's the most recent teachers before their senior year. And so you want to make sure that you're visiting your teachers on a regular basis, spending some time to drop by after school one day for 15 minutes and just talking to them, updating them on what you're up to these days, along with asking them how, their class is going and whatnot. So finally, I'm going to go into the school report, and then we're going to open up for general Q&A. The school report is pretty straightforward. What you have to do is essentially fill out the basic information on it. It just covers your name, your birth date, the school you attend, along with the course load. And then you want to decide whether or not you want to sign the FERPA, which is in regards to your privacy rights. You can review these on the actual common application itself. Pretty much what it's asking you is if you say yes, then what happens is that you can't ever see, the recommendations that are ever submitted on your behalf. However, if you say no, then you can potentially view your recommendations in the future should you ever need to pull them from the common application for some other application or something like that. And then what you want to do is you want to go ahead and hand it to your guidance counselor. So from there, what your guidance counselor is going to do is your guidance counselor is going to put into perspective your academic performance in relation to the rest of your high school class. And what your guidance counselor will also do is kind of do something similar to a teacher recommendation letter, where they will recap who you are, how they've gotten to know you as a student. So hopefully you've met with your guidance counselor at this point, and to really cover the bases in terms of your general standing. So it's really important for colleges to get a feel for this, because if the college sees that you have a 3.9 but doesn't know what that 3.9 is in relation to the rest of your high school class, then that 3.9 could be just a really inflated high school that gives a bunch of A's to a bunch of students. So it's really important for your guidance counselors to fill this out, just because it really gives colleges a good perspective in terms of where you stand in relation to your peers. So regularly meet with your guidance counselor. It seems like a no-brainer, but it's often something that you forget to do, just because oftentimes if you go to public school, guidance counselors face, hundreds of students, and it's difficult to schedule appointments. So you really have to take a proactive effort, go to your guidance office, schedule an appointment on a regular basis, and get to know your guidance counselor. In terms of the application process itself, your guidance counselor is one of your immediate networks to really reach out to whenever you have any questions. And oftentimes, it's really taking that proactive initiative that will make the difference between your guidance counselor actually getting to know you and your guidance counselor just writing, you know, Jeff was a really good student. That's really doesn't really provide colleges much insight, but if you have consistently met with your guidance counselor, have gotten to know them, then you'll be able to give your guidance counselor more to work with when it comes time for that person to write your secondary school report. So the mid-year final report is the last thing that you'll have to do. This is after you've submitted the common application, and it's around that time when you really want to just update schools with what you've been up to. So in this case, it's all the same information as before. You're just giving it to your guidance counselor for them to send off to the school. And what this one is going to do is it's pretty much just going to tell the school how you've been doing your senior year. Make sure that you're not flunking out your classes in senior year. Don't take it as a joke. Don't catch senioritis just because, you know, potentially a school does reserve the right to revoke your admission later on if your grades have suffered in the latter half of your senior year. So the last thing that I'm going to cover is really writing thank you notes. I'm a big advocate of thank you notes. I think that it's a lost art within itself because, students these days, everyone uses smartphones, everyone uses email and whatnot, and it's often easy to forget the old-fashioned approach to things. And I think that the old-fashioned approach can get you really far in the college application process. A story that I often tell if you were in the last webinar of mine that we hosted was, how I got into one of the top one of the top now one of the top 5 colleges in the United States. Um, what I did was I essentially interviewed with an alumni, hit it off with him, and wrote a handwritten thank you note to him and gave it to his office for him. And then later on, during an admissions dinner with all the other admitted students, he actually told my parents that I was the only person of the entire applicant pool that he interviewed that actually spent the time to send a handwritten thank you note. So, that to me was kind of just a kind of eye opener in terms of the power of just physically writing something, taking the time out of your schedule to write something physical and handing it to a person. Because what it really conveys to the other person is that this kid actually cares. This kid actually, took the time out of his day as opposed to just copying and pasting an email template that he can send to 10 different people thanking them all at once, right? So really remember to write some thank you notes all of your teachers um, once your teachers' applications have been submitted, so once your teacher recommendations are submitted, as well as your guidance counselor, what you want to do is you want to just go ahead, go to your local supermarket, go to your local convenience store, pick up a pack of thank you notes. They're really cheap, and then just take a pen and start writing them and deliver them in person, if preferably. If not, just drop them off at their office. It really does go a long way, and this is a really essential skill moving forward that can really go miles in terms of making the right impression and making sure that the people that are helping you out throughout this entire process really do feel appreciated, because what you have to understand is that teachers and guidance counselors, more so teachers, are not obligated to write teacher recommendation letters for you. Maybe guidance counselors, yes, that is part of their jobs. However, for teachers, they have no obligation to you to write a teacher recommendation letter. So that means that when they are spending the time drafting that letter to really convey to an admissions officer that you are the person that's right for that school, they're doing it kind of as overtime. They're not getting paid for it. They're doing it just because they liked you as a student and they really want you to succeed in the future. So make sure that you express your gratitude, express your appreciation for that, and you'll do fine. So what we covered today was we covered the common application, we covered teacher recommendations, and finally we covered guidance recommendations. If there's really one thing to take away from this entire presentation, it's that there's a lot of information that you had to provide in a college application. Obviously, we had to do a general overview run in this past hour, but what you want to do now, if you are a junior, is you want to start looking into the kind of information that's required and start organizing that and looking into colleges. And if you are a senior, you really want to kick up in high gear because you've got a little under 2 months to go before you submit your application. So now that we're done with that, I'm going to open up the floor for questions. And I also have left my email here, will@learnerator.com, and you can feel free to send me any questions there in the case that you have to get going.
Hey, Will, do you have any advice for homeschooled students?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of homeschool students, it's really not that much different from like a normal application process. The common application accepts that as well. All you need to do is just designate that on your common application. And in terms of really getting involved, I don't know what year you're in specifically in high school, but if you are just starting out high school, I would look to potentially get involved in clubs and organizations that are in your local high school. So oftentimes with homeschool students, local high schools are open to offering their clubs and organizations to homeschool students. All you need to do is reach out to the sponsor of that club to get access to that. And that's a great way for you to be able to get access to certain organizations that you wouldn't necessarily have access to if you were to just, you know, only do things that you do as a homeschooled student.
Do you have any recommendations for students with regard to the Firt Buzz? Is there a reason to want to see that information or to not want to see? Are there kind of what are the advantages or disadvantages of that?
I mean, I think that's ultimately I think it dates back to a Supreme Court case. I think in most cases it really doesn't matter that much in terms of what you answer. It's kind of a personal choice. It's up to you where you kind of need to ask yourself, will I ever feel like I need to see what this person wrote about me in the future and use it for something else? And if so, just go ahead and answer no. But if you don't think it's that big of a deal, then you can just go ahead and check yes. what you'll realize is that when you are requesting recommendations from some teachers, if you're really close with that teacher will actually provide you with copies of the recommendation anyways. So I really don't think it's that big of a deal. It's not that pressing in terms of the grand scheme of things. Something to keep in mind as you move forward in the application process is high school seniors tend to stress out about some of the smallest things, and it's oftentimes you have to really keep it into perspective. And this is one of those things where it's really not that big of a deal. Just choose whichever one you feel, more inclined towards.
Okay, great. So student asked, you could also ask the teacher if you'd like to receive a copy and see what they wrote about you in the recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my case, for example, I was really close to my English teacher. I didn't actually ask her for it, but she thought that she had written a really strong recommendation, so she provided to me for me at the end of the application cycle. And I thought, that was really nice of her because I got to see what she wrote. But I think that you should definitely have a little faith towards the teachers that you choose. Like I said, choose. I think the choosing process is more of a big deal than this part of the process, just because you want to make sure that you are confident enough in these teachers and their writing ability as well as how well they know you that you shouldn't feel like you need to even see what they write about you just because you're confident enough that they will convey who you are in the best possible way.
And when do you think it's appropriate, or where do you stand on students creating their brag sheets, their activity sheets to share with their recommenders?
Yeah, so something I recommend with students whenever you are giving your guidance counselor, your teachers, the packets of information or packets of deadlines to meet is to go ahead and provide your activity sheet as well as a senior autobiography. So I don't know if every high school does this, but at least mine did, where essentially where you just answer a few questions about yourself, provide some insights about who you are, and that kind of go beyond the classroom. So some questions in that document would be like, what you're involved with beyond school, any extreme circumstances you might have grown up in terms of, your childhood, talking about what kind of things you're passionate about, what you're interested in, and so on. So just be able to provide as much content as possible up front for your recommend for your recommendations, just because the people, the guidance counselors, the teachers, they'll be able to pull from that document and in some cases quote that document to really be able to help kind of support their argument in their recommendation letter. So I guess one example for that would be my English teacher actually quoted one of my I guess like one of my answers to the senior autobiography just because it was something that she hadn't seen in reading a lot of those senior autobiographies. So potentially you could have something meaningful to say in those documents. But yeah, just provide as much content as possible up front so that they can kind of sift through that, get to know you if they haven't gotten to know you that well in person, so that they can just write something that really, really knocks it out of the ballpark.
Great, yeah, and a couple of people noted that it's helpful sometimes to give your resume to recommenders or share your LinkedIn profile or even your Zinch profile. I actually made up the Zinch profile one, but that works as well. So some other options that are some people are saying out there. So great. Any other questions before we go? We have about 2 minutes left. Next good question gets asked.
All right, well, yeah, if there are no questions, something I do want to mention is that at Learnerator, what we've done is we've actually just recently launched our college segment of our website. And what we've done is we've actually started collecting accepted student essays, admissions essays from some of the top schools in the US, and it's all available for free. All you got to do is go to learnerator.com. Once you click in there and click college, you'll be able to access a bunch of top essays from accepted students that now attend schools like Penn, Columbia, Northwestern, Emory, and so on. And yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really helpful resource to keep in mind. And the other thing is we do have a bunch of practice questions for the AP tests that will come up later on. I know right now you're focusing on college, but yeah, a lot of our content is out there for free. So if you ever need any practice questions, any resources, all of that is available. And something that, I know Zinch offers a really great financial aid course on Udemy that you should check out if your parents are kind of confused about the process. And kind of in tangent with that, Learnerator has a free FAFSA course as well that can really complement that course really well. So yeah, I mean, if there are any final questions before I sign off.
Yeah, we have one final one just asking about how do you recommend that a student works with their parents, or maybe it was a parent asking this, how can a parent get involved, or should they not get involved in kind of facilitating the application process as well as the recommendation letters?
Yeah, I think that the best thing that parents can do, assuming that you do have like a very good like relationship with your child, is that you really want to be kind of you be kind of like the nagging reminder. What I mean by that is you want to make sure that your student stays on track. It's really difficult to keep your student on track, especially during senior year, just because um, they're facing a lot of things in school and they're facing, new classes and everything. So they tend to procrastinate. And the biggest thing that parents can really do in keeping their students on track is to really just ask them how it's going in terms of the process. And, at points in time, there might be these junctions where your respective student gets a little frustrated with you asking you all these questions. But I think that just in terms of the success of that student moving forward, it's vital for the parent to remain involved throughout the entire time frame of August to December 31st, just because oftentimes that's what really gets the student going. Once you get the ball rolling in terms of college applications, students will start to actually devote the time and block out that kind of effort towards college applications, and that's when you start getting results. As a parent, something that I recommend if you have that kind of power over chores or allowances and whatnot, is to go ahead and make sure that your child is devoting at least an hour a day towards their college applications. Something that I used to kind of ask parents to do during the onboarding when I would work with these students would be I would tell them that every single day your students should essentially be asking themselves at the end of the day, have I moved 1 to 2% closer to being done with my college applications? And the idea behind that is that if you are proactively moving closer to the finish line, then it really does take the stress away from the process. And college applications are a really stressful thing. So as a parent, just make sure you're supportive. Make sure that you're also reading the essays. If you have that kind of background, you can be a great resource for your student to reach out to. And but the main primary thing is to just make sure that you keep your student in check, keep your student on task, because they'll get distracted. That's um, a definite kind of outcome just as a result of senior year. So keep them on track and really kind of cut the procrastination out of the student so that they can really devote the time to really do college applications right.
Great. Well, thank you, Will. Thanks everyone for attending. We will send out a follow-up email with some more information on this presentation, as well as some of the free services offered by both Cinch as well as Learnerator. So have a great night. Good luck in the application process. Any final things to add, Will?
Nope, I think that pretty much covers it.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good night.